Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to Looking Ahead, the series where I break down and analyze what's happening in Japan and how that could influence our meta. Today, we're going to look at the results on the big tournament that happened over in Japan and how Miraidon and Lugia outplaced Lost Box. Is this something we should really consider going into this new format? We're going to look at some new cards as well as a tier list which someone created from the points that were created in the City League Championship. First things first, thank you so much for the support. We're on episode 10 and I'm so grateful to every one of you, especially the last few weeks where the channel has exploded, and hello to all my new subscribers. If you're new, be sure to subscribe and click that like button, and without further ado, let's jump into the video. So we had quite a few new cards released, both from the set which came in June and a special 151 set. There were quite a few EXs, but they weren't as strong and powerful, but except the biggest one I thought was Arceus EX, a monstrous 300 HP on a stage 1, with an ability it takes 30 less damage, essentially having 330 HP if there's no path in play. As attack for 2 metal and a colorless, 260 damage and 30 to all of your bench Pokemon. Immediately, this is really strong in Lost Box. If you think about it, it does 14 more than Zamazenta does, and it has 200 more HP. Downside is you do more damage to your bench, so this is really good late game, especially with cards like Thornton. What I love about this is how powerful it can be set up with using Greninja and Sableye in Lost Box to get those big one-hit KOs near the end. Or it could be used as a healing deck. It's so much variety this deck could work with, and I'm excited to see this card to work, kind of how it could see in this meta. We do see Pelipper, which is an amazing, it's kind of a combination between VS-Seeker and Lumineon, where on evolution, you can either search your deck for a supporter, put it to your hand, or put supporter from your discard pile into your hand. Really good late game to get the boss, or early game to get the setup with using research or potentially Iona. I really like this card with no immediate good pickups or effects, like Scoop Up Net or Super Scoop Up. I don't see how this could be played unless you're using some damage modifiers plus Sharon's Care. But if De-Evolution Spray is played and reprinted, this card will immediately become a really good inclusion and potentially going away from cards like Lumineon. Now we're finally seeing some of these comeback cards, which Pokemon promised us back in August. By the time we get them, it would be 10 months after they said it, even in the English language. We see Fighting Milk, which can only be played if you have more prizes than your opponent, and you can heal 60 damage from one of your Pokemon. Immediately, this is good in Gardevoir EX style decks, healing up your Zacians and your Gardevoirs to do some more damage later on. Getting those extra 3 energies is really, really crucial, especially in those normal Gardevoir EXs. Or potentially good in healing sort of cards, decks with like Copperajus if you want to use a big wall Pokemon. Then we see Reversal Energy, an amazing sort of comeback card, especially as if you have more prizes remain than your opponent and it's attached to an evolution Pokemon, which does not have a rule box, it provides every type of energy, provides only 3 energies at a time. Really, really good, especially in Gardevoir decks. The reason why everyone's talking about Gardevoir a lot more, because those are the big sort of impacts we're seeing right now, because you play a stage 3, stage 2 sort of Gardevoir in there as well as Gardevoir EX. And this is an additional 90 damage as 1 energy attachment. It's super, super strong. Again, we will see how it actually impacts sort of the meta game right now, but I'm a huge fan of how this sort of comeback mechanic works. Not as impressive as the last sort of releases, but this set is shaping up to be one of the best in a very long time. Kind of rounding up on the stream, they released some of the 151 cards. What really fun that's unique about this is all the Pokemon are actually in Pokedex order, as in Mew EX is number 151, so there's no actual going to be like 2 Alakazams or 2 Mews, as far as we're aware. But it's the return of Kadabra in over 20 years. Finally, the lawsuit is dropped, and we can finally have Kadabra cards again, and Alakazam can finally be a stage 2. It has 2 attacks, Mind Jack, 90 plus 30 for each bench Pokemon your opponent has. Pretty decent, it can do additional 240 damage, but it's a maze attack, Dimensional Manipulation, I believe, 120 damage, but this Pokemon can attack even if it's on the bench. Think of Klefki, think of the Mimikyu Safeguard. Yes, you also heard that correct, it's from the bench. So you can have these wall-style Pokemon or disruptive cards and then do these big attacking damage onto the bench is really, really strong. Yes, it is a stage 2. Yes, it has 310 HP, but having attacking from the bench while having a safety net of Mimikyu and Klefki is really, really powerful and disruptive, especially on your opponent. I think this card could definitely see some play. Card which may see some place, maybe in like a Lugia, is Mew EX. Ability is not really very strong, draw into your 3 cards in your hand, but the Genome Hack allows you to use one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it as its own. Really good, especially in Lost Tina, using not Star Requiem, the Lost Zone attack, as well as the Greninja's attack. Sorry, these names are all blanky from me today. I don't know why. I've been thinking about these non-stop for months. By the time you want to think about it, it all disappears. But yeah, this could be good in Lugia, especially because you're already playing high counts of energies. But yeah, not as impressive, but a card I am impressed is Giovanni's Charisma, where you can move one of your opponent's active Pokemon's energy to the hand, and if you do, attach an energy from your hand to your active Pokemon. It doesn't specify if it's basic or special, which I'm a huge fan of. The reason why this could be really good, especially in these disruptive style decks, is energy acceleration, not your energy per turn. You could even use this in Miraidon, because you're already playing a huge amount of energy to get those extra energy attachment, and then you can go absolutely crazy by using the big setups that you might need, as well as being disruptive on your opponent. And then you have safety goggles, because what do big basics don't want? They don't want weakness, so they just added this. It's fine with this card. It's nothing big and crazy out of the way. So far, this set is seeming not as strong as the last one, but some really unique sort of effects like the Alakazam and Giovanni's Charisma. Something which I'm really liking to see that Pokemon is taking initiative, listening to us weirdly about the game, and showing some improvements to the game that we love. So for City Leagues, there's none last week. I don't believe there are any this week, but someone here created a tier list with all the points accumulated throughout it. Again, no surprise, Lost Box is the #1 archetype. It didn't lose too much. It gained so much, like Beach Court, as well as Halucha, and it can use single prize and 2 prize attackers. Using Sableye being absolutely out of control automatically makes it a tier 1 archetype. Tier 2 doesn't go straight to Giratina. It goes to Lugia. Lugia, there is now 2 archetypes, especially since I talked about last week. The second one is becoming a lot more popular using the Weirdeal one, especially at the Champions League. It's incredibly powerful, not as strong and toxic as it was last time, but having a Summoning Star ability, it is too good not to miss, especially with Team of Archeops. Giratina, yes, if we combine the Lost Box, you do get a huge amount of points and double the amount of what Lugia would have, but it fell just behind there, but Luke, it is still just as powerful. It's an amazing Lost Bone attack, as well as Star Requiem, one of the strongest attacks in the game. Mew, like I said, it lost Quick Ball, but gained Nest Ball and Feather Ball. That's why it's incredibly powerful. A big jump down is Miraidon and Gardevoir. These are the new archetypes that have kind of come around, and they're still sticking there. Not as well as like Giratina or Lugia, but they are doing better than I thought. And Gardevoir actually is better than I thought. Thought it'd be a lot lower down, because it only really saw a lot more play after it did well in the last Champions League. These decks, they definitely struggle a bit, like Miraidon with its damage output early on, Gardevoir with its setup. You need to try and attack with Gardevoir and get the setup with Gardevoir EX turn 2. If you don't use Mirage Step, you can really fall behind, and that's where this deck can really struggle. And then the tier 4s go down to the Arceus decks. Still just as powerful, but even if you combine both of them, they don't even add up to either Gardevoir's points. This is something which I think is really helpful to see at the kind of like the close end of the City League before we get into the new cards when they come out in Japan next week. Nice to see a little bit of reflection to kind of go in before we talk about the sort of the results at the tournament. So if you're testing for EUIC, these are the decks you really need to understand to test against. Definitely the top 4 having Lost Box, Giratina, Lugia, as well as Mew, and then kind of like lower ones which you need to know and understand, like Miraidon, Gardevoir, and Arceus Tina, and Arcdura. These are decks which have performed incredibly well and will hopefully continue well into our format. So the latest tournament happened over this weekend in Japan. Unfortunately, I actually don't know how many players are up. I saw there were this many. I've seen that there was 2,000, so it's in between the sort of two sort of numbers. So it was a very large tournament nevertheless. And their structure is all best of 1, 9 rounds day 1, 5 rounds day 2, and then single elimination top 16. All of them best of 1, and the highest sort of match points you go through, you go all the way in there. So yes, very nice to see that it's still quite a big tournament. And I really liked it about it because I got to see the win rates and I wanted to share it with you. We don't know what the matchups were like. This is what it is in the best of 1. And kind of, it's very different to what I thought it was. The decks which have a positive one, over 50% being Lugia, Lost Box, Mew, and Gardevoir. Definitely we're seeing the increase in Gardevoir because, like I said, people are opting to go for the turn 2 Gardevoir EX, and that's exactly what you need to kind of keep in the game. But the ones that have lower are Miraidon and Lost Zone Tina. Lost Zone Tina is because it was the best deck in format. It still probably is the most powerful one, but more people are teching for it, understanding matchup, and really trying to gun to try and get a really good match against it. They know how to go around it. They know to go kind of get the 2 prize attacks on like Comfees or bring up the mana feed to get KOs there, but they need to always be careful on the Giratina. Miraidon being so low, being 43%, kind of goes with what I talked about last week with it falling off. It didn't perform as well in the City Leagues, but it also doesn't perform as well here. Getting 43% win rate is nothing to really shout about. Although Miraidon did in fact win the tournament, spoiler alert, but something to really consider that it didn't perform as well looking at its win rate. But how does this affect sort of the meta share? Well, if we look at it, Lugia was actually the most played deck. If we combine Lost Zone archetypes, they do win, but Lugia actually was the most dominant one. We're seeing more of this increase of the weirder style decks as well as a single strike, and that's why these decks are just as powerful. Going into the Lost Box, I'm not surprised that the regular one is higher than Giratina, because the regular one, again, you don't need to rely too much on Giratina to really get the wins. You can just use like Radiant Charizard, use Sableye, use Radiant and Greninja to really get those big KOs over time. That's one thing I love about it, because Sableye has unrestricted amount of damage because no one's really using Penny to get some healing or Sharon's Care. Tina, again, incredibly powerful. I think it's got a lot more of a target on its head when it goes to these big tournaments, but also a really nice safety net to guarantee some lovely easy wins. I thought that Mew would be the 3rd most popular deck, but actually it falls down to regular Gardevoir. Gardevoir, probably because of how powerful it did in the last one, I'm noticing that the decks that perform really well have the very much the smaller percentage compared to the last sort of the counterpart, which actually ends up winning. So that's nice to see the Gardevoir is still doing well and is becoming a bit more of a threat than like even Mew, but I still think Mew is definitely stronger. If we combine all the Mew decks, it does become the 3rd most popular deck, or 4th technically. But Mew, especially, Judge Path is nothing to write home about because it is so powerful. But Miraidon having 6.3% meta and having a 43% win rate, it doesn't look very promising for it. Especially if you go with that stuff up, it's not performing as well as I would hope. That's why I feel like it did fall off, but it ended up getting the win, so that's something to always consider. And the other decks go into Arceus Giratina. There was in fact the Dialga deck, which made somewhere in the sort of meta share, I think it was 0.76%. All the links of everything I use is in the description below if you want to kind of look and peruse at your own sort of leisure. So yeah, looking at this meta share, Lugia is looking a lot more dominant than Lost Box right now. If you buy Lost Box, they become a lot more powerful, but Lugia is definitely as an archetype being very formidable. Not the numbers of what we're used to having, but it is kind of creeping up there where Lugia, it can just do Lugia things and just be really, really powerful. So how does all of this meta shape up to become the top 16? Well, again, Lugia is just as dominant, getting 7 spots, which is absolutely insane. This is like Lost Box in the last sort of tournament. Lugia, it has the split between the Weird Ear and the single strike version, but it's incredibly powerful, especially that Summoning Star attack. Kind of opting mainly to main attack with Lugia Vstar and then going with the other ones like the Weird Ear to move all the energy to get these big one-hit KOs or Tyranitar is something not to be scared of. We also see Comfey doing the Lost Zone decks, getting pretty well, but only having 3 spots. And Giratina has a 1-1 split between the Lost Zone and the Arceus build, something which is very much a big surprise than what we're used to seeing. Miraidon actually gets 2 spots, the best it's ever done in Japan. Actually, I think the best it's done ever in tournaments. I think beforehand it did get maybe 1 top 16, but having 2 spots in top 16, I believe it is its best, because right now its best finish, I believe, was top 8 at regionals like a month ago. And then 1 spot to Gardevoir and Mew. I don't know where most of the top 8 below sort of fall, but I understand where the rest of the top 8. Looking at this, you might see, oh, Charlie, this is very similar to sort of your City League results about the top decks. Yes, it is. And all of them have appeared in them. So it's good to see that all the decks I talk about saying, these are the ones which are doing well. These are the ones you should consider. Guess what? These are the ones that did well. So fans on the channel who've been watching for a couple of weeks now have understood exactly what decks are performing well. They know why Lugia is doing well, because it's really slowly coming up the ranks, especially last week, dominating with its new decks which come around. And Lost Box did fall behind just a little bit. So looking at all of this, very scary that Lugia is doing so well and EUIC is on the brink literally next weekend. What deck ended up winning? Yes, it was in fact Miraidon. EX ended up winning, sorry about the quality, and this was the winning list. Now, we did play a 2-2 line of Magnezone, no Clef Keys, no 1-1 Pikachu VMAX, because Magnezone V allows you to bring up a Pokemon on the bench, i.e. a Manaphy, to get the one-hit kill in that way, and then use Magnezone Vstar's Vstar attack to do 90 damage to two of your opponent's Pokemon. Getting those KOs on the bench, trying to get those 3 prizes, potentially in 2 turns, is exactly what you need in Miraidon. Miraidon, especially in Lizard decks, needs to initiate the prize rate and keep up, because if it immediately falls behind, it really, really struggles. I'm going to do a breakdown on this list on Wednesday, so be sure to check that out. Few other cards of note I want to note. They do play 2 copies of EXP Share. I love this sort of inclusion in this list because Miraidon can really, really struggle, especially with energy acceleration, kind of the mid to late game, because if they're not getting the energy recycler or the electromagnetic things are not hitting, this deck can really, really struggle. So that's one thing I really like about this, and having the 2 copies of Raikou V, I really like because it's 1 less energy cost than using Miraidon, easy early game attackers, as well as also really good late game, but you do get, your opponent does control how much damage it does. But if you have 2 Regieleki VMAX out, you're doing 20 for Raikou, you have the bench full, that's 120, 2 copies of Regieleki, you're doing 180 damage. If you chuck a choice bet on that, that's 210, just your side alone to any V Pokemon. Very, very good sort of matchup numbers. Support account energy, very similar to what we're used to seeing, but they do play the 2 Pokegear. Again, I'm going to go into more detail in a couple of days' time, but very happy to see Miraidon do well, and it won against Single Striker Lugia. If you've actually watched the game, the Miraidon player did incredibly well because they always targeted the Lugia. They actually didn't end up getting Lugia till where it's far too late, and the Miraidon players end up winning the game. Very different to what we're seeing in sort of list, a higher count of boss, no Tower of Darkness, but they're opting to play 2 Metagoza and 2 copies of Collapse Stadium, trying to get the easy guaranteed support and disruptive on the opponent. They're also playing a few interesting counts of supporter, the 1 Bennett and the 1 Serena, as your kind of like a one-off sort of discard effect. But having a higher count of Lumineon means it's easier to get to those sort of numbers. Do play 1 Radiant Serena. This can help a lot in your matchup, especially against Sableye. Sableye's got a list of the board with loads of other cards, potentially even Magnezone Vstar. Getting that extra 2 damage heal and everything is really, really strong. Nothing too much of a big note, which I want to mention. There is a lot of coin flips to get the Pokemon they want, and people are now opting to go to a 4-3 line of Lugia. A lot of times, everyone opted to go with the 4-4 line of Lugia Vstar because of the very limited amount of the Pokemon search in this deck. And only 1 copy of Stonejourner. They clearly weren't expecting Miraidon in the finals. You could pretty much play this exact list right now in the format, except that you have to change the 2 copies of Jet Energy. Overall, very much impressed by this list. Unfortunately, this is Lugia's kind of heyday. It's doing incredibly well in this format. Definitely something to really test against, especially if you're going to the new tournaments. And it won actually against the weirder version, which we mentioned last week. Again, very similar to the other list we talked about. It plays a high count of boss, high count of Lumineon to guarantee the Professor Barnett, or even Zinnia's Resolve to get the discard. Does go with the 4-4 line of Lugia, but 4 copies of Mesagoza. I really don't like a coin flip to guarantee a Pokemon search, but right now we're in a format where there really isn't many Pokemon searching right now, except Nestball and the Ultra Ball. So something to really consider, and not really that many sort of attackers. You're mainly using Lugia as your main attacker, and then Snorlax to go into single prizes and Weirded to close out the game, and Drapion to go into your Gardevoir as well as your Muse. Very, very simple style deck, high count of boss, really, really strong. I'm going to kind of talk about this deck also on Friday as a different sort of archetype to really consider and potentially show my sort of version, how it could work in our current format, because these ones do play the Jet Energy. I'm a big fan of this style of list. It's very different to other Lugias, not getting the big one-hit KOs too much later on in the game than what we're used to. And then rounding up the top 4, we do have Arceus Giratina finally making the top 4 in Japan. It didn't make it in the last one. Very disruptive this one is. It plays 3 copies of Judge, 1 copy of Sharon's Care, 3 copies of Path to the Peak, and 2 copies of Lost City. I do find this is very, very vulnerable to being pathed out, so you can't use your Starbirth sort of ability. So that's something to consider, especially if you're going on. Like you only have 2 outs to it. You do have Raihan to get the energy in them, plus any card you may need. But yeah, it's not really that. It can be quite path locked. Again, high counts of boss. A lot of these decks really are opting with boss because not many people are just playing loads of Vs. We are seeing an increase of EXs and single prize attackers, hence why boss is becoming a lot more impactful than cards like Serena. I do like it. It does play the 2/2 Bibarel and the 1 Swovet. It does play the Swovet line. Swovet is really cool ability where you can shuffle your hand, put it at the bottom of your deck, draw 1, then use Bibarel to draw up to your 5. So try and get as much out of your deck as possible. Overall, this deck is very simple. You accelerate, you hit with your Arceus, and then you hit hard with using the Starburn with Giratina, Lostburn with Giratina, Vstar's attack. Very powerful deck. Weird that Lone Lost Box ended up in the top 4. Some of them might have made top 8, but they hasn't been released as of yet. As soon as they do, I'll probably talk about it next week. So that rounds up the tournament's results. And overall, a very different tournament than what I expected at all. I expected Lost Box to dominate it, and no way in heck did I imagine Miraidon EX to actually take home the win. Can this keep up? Like last week it was falling down. This week it did really well. For those who kind of feel like the trend, this is the same thing that happened when Lost Box won. Lost Box was kind of falling down. It wasn't doing as well as Giratina. Then all of a sudden when it won, it was unstoppable and constantly doing well. I do think Lost Box will in fact bounce back and do just as strong. I think there might be some other regionals coming up soon, so I will obviously talk about that. And we might see more even out top 8s. Yes, we did see two Lugia decks, but all of them were different in top 4, which was really nice to see that they were all different sort of archetypes. Could this carry on going into our sort of format, as well as in Japan, as we're getting more and more closer to some of the more exciting tournaments that happen? So, my name is TCG. I hope you have enjoyed this sort of breakdown about what has been doing well over in Japan this past week, as well as the tournament. If you have, be sure to like and subscribe down below. I'll be back in a couple of days breaking down some of the deck profiles that happen, as well as getting some next week. I'm going to talk a bit more about EUIC, because that is next week, and let's see if all the knowledge I've kind of come across has actually put into work. There may not be Looking Ahead released on Monday, as I will be away, so it could be out on Tuesday, so please be aware of that, but similar time, 7 p.m. UK time. So, my name is TCG. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in a few days. Bye-bye.